We are live this Tuesday morning. It is May 24th, and I want to thank you for joining us live. If you are joining us live at 10:30 a.m. Eastern Time, if you are watching a replay, thank you for doing that. If you are live, you have the unique opportunity of being able to dialogue with our guests via the comment section. You can put any questions or comments in there, and she will address them live on air. If you are watching a replay, please feel free to put your comments in the replay and dialogue with other people who are also watching replays. A lot of you do, and we thank you for that. But our guest will not be able to do that. She's not going to be on the replay. Whether they're bystanders or targets, at some point, teens will be exposed to some form of discrimination. And we, as parents and guardians, want to know, what do we do ahead of that, after it happens, ongoing? Clinical psychologist and psychiatry and behavioral science professor Dr. Gail Wyatt knows what to do. It's a big topic, and it's a scary topic, and it's also an unavoidable topic. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Wyatt. I so appreciate your being here with us today.
Well, thank you for inviting me. It's an honor to have an opportunity to speak to large audiences and especially about teens.
I want our audience to know that Dr. Wyatt is a professor, as I said, but she's a professor at UCLA, which means she is in Los Angeles. She is on the West Coast. It is 7:30 in the morning where she is, and she is bright and chipper and laughing and smiling with us. So thank you, especially for that. Uh,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
why don't you tell us? Go ahead.
I was just saying it's always a challenge being from Los Angeles. It seems like either it's 2:30 in the morning and 10 o'clock somewhere else or whatever. So, but you got to really want to do it. And this is important.
Thank you. We appreciate that. Thank you. I want you to tell us a little bit about yourself and your work, but your resume is huge. So we could spend the entire half hour discussing it. So I just want you to hit the highlights so that we can get on to our discussion. But we're going to post her we're going to post her bio in the comment section, and I encourage everybody to read it.
Well, thank you. I am, as you said, a full professor at UCLA in the Department of Psychiatry, but I am a licensed clinical psychologist. The reason I am in psychiatry and not in psychology is because in order to become a medical doctor, you have to be trained by a number of different disciplines, and psychology is one of them. It's important that you know that in most people's training, when it has to do with the mind, the brain, and the body, there are lots of different disciplines that help a person to become knowledgeable, because you're not just dealing with an arm or a leg, you're dealing with a whole person. And it's really that emphasis that brings me to be concerned about discrimination in these particular times, because we hear so many mean, nasty put downs daily about African descended people. And I think it's important that we reclaim our space on some of these issues and clarify to everyone, including teens, that this is the kind of behavior that they have to be very concerned about, because incidents of discrimination can affect, as you said, your health and your mental health. I founded and direct a Center for Culture, Trauma, and Mental Health Disparities. It's one of very few in the United States or the world. And the reason that founded it and I direct it is because these are three areas: culture, trauma, and mental health disparities that are not talked about a lot, not well understood, and yet they rule our lives in very interesting ways. I think that issues of discrimination have really never been talked about in terms of mental health. What does it do to you to constantly hear someone say mean and purposefully mean things to you, or do things to make life more difficult for you? Our ancestors tolerated this behavior to some extent because they had fewer choices. They were
Mhm.
in a situation where they were literally abducted. brought to America against their will and forced to live and try to adjust in a world where they didn't know the language, they didn't know anybody, they didn't know what was expected of them, and there was pretty much always punishment for anything that they did wrong, though they weren't told what to do except to do anything they were told. Now, if you think about that, they weren't told what to do, but they were forced to do anything that they were told. That means somebody tells you something and you do it
Mhm.
or you're punished. That kind of ancestry is about 400 years old in America when it has to do with African descended people. But as long as we've been here, all our ancestors and us today have experienced racial discrimination. So it's almost like that came with those ships on the shores, that there was someone that was going to say prejudicial things to us that would put us down, that would make us feel less than, and based on the fact that whoever was saying it had some value that was negative and that they wanted to make sure that we knew just how little they felt about us, with hopes that we would feel the same about ourselves too. So, discrimination is a means by which people can transfer very negative thoughts and behaviors and even policies to keep other people down. You can discriminate against certain kinds of dogs, certain
Mhm.
kind of birds. You can do it anywhere in your life and it is done. But the most injurious to us as African descended people is racial discrimination. Why do I say that? Because they're looking at us. They see the color of our skin. They see our eyes. They see the shapes of our noses and our mouths. They see the texture of our hair. And the assumption is there's something not good about any of that. And so it's easy to discriminate racially. It's harder to discriminate sometimes by gender because today you can't assume that anyone who looks female is a woman.
Mm.
You can't assume that any form of discrimination can be made without more information. But when you see a visible person, we call them people of color, then that's when discrimination is so easily offered, given out.
Mhm.
Prejudicial. When you're prejudiced, that means you're against something, someone, some policy, some behavior. So it's really important that you know it, and you know what to do about it, and you know how to heal from it because you can't leave that inside of you. You can't grow older with all these years and years of having heard something. It then begins to affect how you feel about yourself. And that's what we want to prevent. I think that we wouldn't be in this program today if we believed some of the things that had been said about us. So it's important that you know how critical this issue is. This is not anything to sneeze at. This is something that we should not tolerate, not behaviors, not policies that keep us out of different places because we don't belong based on something that someone has read or someone was taught to believe about us. And let me just say, discrimination begins in the home. So when I say it's taught, it's usually taught by parents. Parents make statements about certain people that are better than other people, smarter than other people, better athletes, better singers, entertainers, scholars, you name it. But African descended people are hardly ever assumed to be on the top of any list. Isn't that something? On the top of any list? Can't we do something right? Not if you discriminate.
I think we do survival right.
That's the one thing they didn't expect us to do, is to survive.
Now, you have outlaid racial discrimination, which by far is the most common. But what are other types of prevalent discriminations that we encounter?
Oh, it could be anything based
Mhm.
on hair color. It could be height, weight,
Mhm.
huge stigma to being overweight, which
Mhm.
is something that's been very commonly seen
Mhm.
in African American. men and women, particularly women. Um, Language, accents, clothes, um, educational programs. I mean, it doesn't end anywhere. People
Mhm.
are discriminated against because of their beliefs. Religion is a huge area in our lives where people discriminate. They feel that they are chosen, they're doing and saying the right things, and anyone who doesn't share those beliefs uh, is not as good. They're not going to heaven. They're not the quality of people. And we know, I just need to tell you, there is no occupation in this world that anybody has that excludes people who behave inappropriately, illegally, criminally, and in ways to harm other people. So when we talk about people who discriminate, it could be your minister, your priest, your rabbi, your imam. It doesn't matter. Discrimination can be mouthed by anybody. And so we have to have a reaction to this because it's very lethal, and particularly today. There used to be a time when people might want to discriminate against you, and maybe they think twice because they know in many ways it's illegal, it's unethical. But today, they do and say what they want to say. And so it's like all all social norms, all things that your parents told you about, well, be nice to people. That's not working today. Isn't that
Are
something?
It is something. It's something. It's
Mhm.
noticeable too. Are there forms of discrimination that teens witness or are on the receiving end of more than others?
Well, I would say their presence. I would say their size. I would say their hair, because we have had to literally create laws that allow African Americans to wear their hair the way they want to. That's amazing.
Mhm.
It could be anything about a teen, but
Mhm.
it's usually just seeing them. Just if they are dark skinned, very dark
Mhm.
skinned, people will pick on that. You see, and that's the bullying kind of behavior that you also see. People taking advantage of anything that they think makes a person very sensitive about themselves.
Mhm.
When I grew up, I was very small. I was short and tiny,
Mhm.
and people would tease me and discriminate against me. How could they discriminate against a small, tiny person? I was never picked on any sports team. I was always the last one. That's discrimination. They didn't even know I could play. I couldn't, but they didn't know that.
Yeah.
So discrimination is really based on misunderstanding, misinformation, distortions of the truth, something that's been passed along that people assume is true. And based on that information, they discriminate against people. So you can't say it's just one thing about teens or one thing about adults. It could be anything.
And how does discrimination affect a teen, especially whether they're the bystander or the on the receiving end of it? What kind of effects does it have, either physical or emotional?
Well, if you're a bystander, you're simply watching somebody else
Hmm.
discriminate against someone with
Hmm.
language, with behavior. So you could be so called just watching, just hanging out.
Hmm.
If you are the recipient, that means somebody is saying things or doing things against you. That is where I think we really have to look at, how that person perceives something that puts them down, that they can't do simply because of something about themselves. Sometimes you don't even know what it is. Today, you can drink in water fountains. That's a very common area of discrimination. You can
Hmm.
eat in restaurants. When I was growing up, you couldn't. There were laws against it. And today, restaurants, businesses are all bound by laws. They're not supposed to discriminate. But what do? Different things that are more subtle, putting you next to the kitchen. putting your table, if you go in a restaurant, next to the kitchen. So constantly that door is opening and shutting, and yet you're paying for a quiet atmosphere
Mhm.
where you wouldn't expect to have to be in the kitchen or next to the kitchen.
Mhm.
Putting you in a school that forces you to share books versus a school that has new books for everyone every year is an act of discrimination. That happens all the time.
Yeah. So, what should we as parents be doing? Because we want our children to be able to identify this. We also want to strengthen them in case they are on the receiving end, whether they're being discriminated against, whether it's racial, whether it's sexual preference, gender identity, whether it is intellectual capacity on either end. So, what should we be doing as parents?
I think parents need to be far more involved than they are.
Mhm.
It's not enough to call somebody out in a PTA meeting, parent teacher meeting, or
Mhm.
an opportunity to see other kids after school and before school, which is where parents usually congregate.
Mhm.
Parents need to go up to the school,
Mhm.
make time, take time off, make your working hours so that you can speak to the teacher
Mhm.
personally and the principal. You need to speak to the administrators, the people who oversee how children, how teens treat each other, and let them know that you are very concerned. This is before anything happens at the beginning of school about the way that your child will be treated in this atmosphere. Why? Because the assumption is that Black parents are too busy, that we have jobs that don't allow us to get involved in our children's activities, and we have to show up. It's not enough to send a note. It's not enough to be angry after something has happened. You
Mhm.
have to set the tone before. If you can, join the Parent Teacher Association. That's where other parents have an opportunity to make laws and rules that our children have to abide by. But I'm saying we need to be present, we need to be vocal, and we need to let other parents know that we will not tolerate any kind of discriminatory behavior in the school setting. Parents in Florida, white parents, made it very clear that they did not want any discussion of race taught in the public schools from preschool through high school. That
Mhm.
is unbelievable and totally unacceptable. Where were the Black parents? Where were they when this was happening?
Yeah.
It's just amazing. You cannot learn history. You can't learn any subject without interacting with one of the very common ways in which America decides on how they're going to organize people, and that's by the color of their skin. It's
Mhm.
ingrained in our everyday lives, and yet they're saying we don't want anybody to teach it. We don't want to allow our children to be upset by these discussions. Well, what about Black kids? Don't you think they were upset when they didn't hear anything about their contributions to how this country operates today? That's absolutely inappropriate and should be struck down, and parents should be working to strike it down. But what I'm saying is, we don't have to just act like we aren't existing, we're too busy, and we don't care. We know these experiences. Just because they happen every day doesn't mean it's okay. So parents need to go to the principal and say, what is your policy
Mhm.
about discrimination? When you see it, when a teacher makes a statement, when another kid makes a statement, what is your policy on how to handle that? I want my child, I want my teen to grow up in an atmosphere that allows them to feel empowered in every aspect of this school. So tell me, what do I tell my child about how to act when these things happen? Do they come to you? Do they come to me? Do we both come together? Let me know. That sets the tone, because that's
That's very important.
very,
Asking when something happens,
yeah,
because if you live long enough, something will. What
that's
do we
true.
do? What's the policy? What's the process? What can I expect? What if we take it a little closer to home? You have a child who you know is going to be a target at some point because of their color, because of their sexual preference, they're quirky, whatever. How do you begin preparing that child for an unavoidable future encounter?
I think parents have to talk about what kind of experiences they had at home
Mhm,
before you get into the specific disability or
mhm,
learning challenge that a child has. Just talking about
mhm.
discrimination, period. What
Okay.
was it like for them growing up? How were they treated? What did their parents?
Mhm,
How did it feel, most importantly, when they were discriminated against? And what did they
mhm,
do with those feelings? Most times you hear that parents were discriminated against because they were poor, because
mhm,
perhaps they had difficulty with money and lunchtime, so they didn't eat. There
mhm,
was something about their lifestyle that called them out, and other kids knew it.
mhm.
But there should not be any discriminatory actions taken towards a child who has fewer economic resources. But we need the stories told. In other words, discrimination should
Yes.
not be new when you go to school. Your
Mhm,
parents have to be the ones to tell the stories. And these are painful stories. These
mhm,
are sad stories, usually.
mhm,
And it's important that if your parents did something that you were really proud of, like they went up to school and said something, that you
mhm,
share those stories of victory, that your parents stood up for you. If your parents never did and they never knew how other people treated you, then it's important to share what that feels like. Loneliness, isolation, being less than somebody else, having something wrong with you. Many times, things that make us different doesn't mean anything is wrong with us. So you're setting the stage. Then you move to, not everybody is as intelligent. Not everybody does well on tests. Not everybody is a good athlete. Not everybody learns in the same way. So you're moving
mhm.
closer now to something that may be a challenge for your own child. And talk about how you saw that being handled in the setting. And then you move to acknowledging that that child may have some of those challenges. And it's really important about the words that you use to describe what it is that you want to prepare your child for. And when I say child, I mean teen.
Yes. And they're very much still children in our eyes
In
and our
our eyes, but in their eyes, they're adolescents. They know a whole bunch,
yeah.
but not quite enough.
How do we help them be good bystanders?
By
They
speaking out,
see,
speaking
uh-huh.
out, don't stand there and say, fight. This is what I usually see, fight, and then allowing that to happen. Sometimes kids really enjoy somebody being beaten up or bullied
Mhm,
because they feel anger in themselves and frustration, and they get a chance to kind of express it vicariously by watching somebody else beat up or perpetrate an act on somebody and someone being hurt. We can't get enough of that. Look at television. Look how much of that we see every day. Someone being better than, stronger than somebody else, and seeing that person being beaten up. So we need to speak out. That's
mhm,
wrong. You call it out. Go get the administrator, the teacher, someone who can stop it. You don't want to ever be in that position of being hurt by somebody, and you don't want anybody else to. If you stand up, you should feel good about yourself. You didn't allow that to happen. You didn't just go home and gossip about, oh, somebody got really, their clothes were torn. No. What is important is we take care of each other, and that behavior of speaking out, reporting it, is not always easy because people will say anybody who tells is going to get beaten up. Then you do it vicariously. You write notes, you work through your parents, but you report it. Those people, if they get away with it, will pick on somebody else, and it may be you.
I love that we take care of each
Each other.
other.
Mm-hmm.
I love that. I love, and then we can at home talk to them and say, what would you do if, or
Yes.
I heard about this. You
Mm-hmm.
mentioned in society that we like watching and hearing about people being on the receiving end. And it reminded me where I get my nails done when I do have that done. They have 24/7 with without stop a channel on the TV that is all fails. All it is people hurting themselves, trying tricks and hurting themselves. And and that's supposed to be entertainment. And that's what goes for entertainment now.
Mhm.
So if I bring it up because if we are entertaining ourselves that way, then we're
Mhm.
desensitizing ourselves to the fact that people are being hurt.
Yes. And we're not doing anything about it. It's actually funny. I mean, those are programs
Mm-hmm,
about people hurting themselves, bumping into something,
mm-hmm,
losing something, getting something broken.
mm-hmm,
And that's sadistic. That means we enjoy the process of hurting someone else because of our own feelings. So we can watch a program that gives us permission to feel that way. What we need to be looking at is how people can help each other, how
mm-hmm.
they can save somebody. And we sometimes see those, not nearly enough. That's what you call
Where
social behavior, where you're teaching people how to
Mhm.
care for each other, how to be compassionate.
If I'm a parent and this interests me and I don't know where to start, are there any resources or places I can go to help me either initiate conversations or read more about the topic?
I say public education television, the one that you
Mhm.
pay for, has more pro-social programs on it. I don't
Mhm.
know how many there are for teens. I'm not saying that this is something everybody talks about or writes
Mhm.
about.
Mhm.
Um, Sometimes you see it in comic books where you see the characters saving someone. I guess that's why Superman and some of these other Marvel comic characters are so popular, because usually they have enormous amounts of strength and they go
Mhm.
in and take care of the weak person or the person who's been hurt by somebody else. So you
Mhm.
see it that way. I wish I could say that I know where, other than religious material. Um, I read the Daily Word in the morning, but there has to be some kind of positive reading that you can share at home
Mhm.
every day, that gives people the sense that what we really want to do is not what we always see. I want to repeat that. What we really want to do is not what we always see. Why is that? Because
Mhm.
there is economy in chaos. When we break things, tear up something, hurt people, people actually make money off of people who are brutal, mean, discriminatory, perpetrators. They make money off of taking advantage of other people. That's why people have scams where they try to steal your home or your identification. I remember my husband telling stories about there was a bully at his elementary school. He was 13 in the fifth grade. He had not passed and obviously had some learning challenges, but nobody was paying any attention. So he just kept repeating elementary school,
Mhm. Mhm.
and took his lunch and said, I'm going to take your lunch every day. Um, so what was he to do? He didn't want to fight him. He was huge. And
Mhm.
that's how he took advantage of everybody. So he had a cousin. Well, see, I didn't have a cousin. I don't know about you, but I didn't have a cousin. And his cousin was also huge, and he went up and told the guy, leave him alone.
Mhm.
You have to have someone who advocates for you. Well, in today's world, then we need the principal, the teacher, somebody who will stand up for each kid. Not getting into trouble, not getting into physical fights is the goal.
Mhm.
Because for Black kids, that usually means they're being identified as aggressive. And if they
Mhm.
are male, it really tends to work against them, not for them. Now, kids will say, look, when I beat somebody up, everybody respects me. And it's true. Kids will respect the kid who is the perpetrator, who's the stronger one. But in the larger world, they will be punished.
That's important. I love what you're suggesting about the superheroes, because you can begin a conversation with that. If you're watching the
Mhm.
latest, I think Doctor Strange is the latest one,
Yes.
but if you're watching the latest superhero movie, um, you can have a conversation, and it doesn't have to be a forced one, about coming to someone's aid and what it's like to be on the receiving end of, and what
Yes.
somebody else can do, and your place in that.
Hmm. And you can watch it with them, with your team, so
Hmm.
that you can have a dialogue at the end of the program on what they got out of it and what you got out of it. Sometimes I have watched the most egregious television program because it is a great teacher of what it is that you may not want your kid to see. If
Mhm.
you don't know what they're watching, you can't be judgmental. But if you watch
Mhm.
it with them, then you got the opportunity to have a dialogue. Make sure they get
Absolutely.
out of it what you want them to get out of it. And that is that there are other ways of handling problems.
Mhm. If there is one tip that you want to give parents who are watching this and they know that their child has either witnessed or been on the receiving end of some form of discrimination and they want to help the child, and perhaps the child hasn't mentioned it or they have and the parent didn't know what to do, what is the one tip that you would give them?
Talk about it.
Hmm.
If you can't do a thing about it and your teen does not want you to get involved and tell, talk about it.
Okay.
You may be able to convince them that if you're silent, then you will be a setup for it to happen again. And you might say, well, I'm not going to be in that setting anymore, so I don't have to worry. Yes, we do. Yes, we do. We have to say it. My mother was at school every single time I came home and told her. The teacher did not acknowledge me, did not call on me in class, that I had my hand up and I knew the answer. This is very subtle, but the teacher ignored me. That is cause for a parent to go up to school. And
Hmm.
people say, oh, just wait till the next time. Mm-mm, mm-mm. You can't assume that every teacher has your best interest, unfortunately, but that's
Hmm.
the world. That's the way the world is. So
Hmm.
that's why I'm saying go before anything happens and set the tone.
Hmm.
Then when someone reports something, then you have to go. You've got to go. You have to demonstrate that that is not going to be tolerated.
I
Because
love that.
your child will get the lower grade because they didn't have their hand up. And there's no proof of it.
Yeah.
Another thing I do is just have your teen write down exactly what happened and the time and the day.
Hmm.
So you want to follow that up. You've got the written evidence, the time
Hmm.
and the day that it occurred. And
Hmm.
then it's going to be on the teacher or whomever did this to have to defend why it is they did it and why didn't they handle it in a different way so that your child felt that they could speak to the teacher about it or speak to another kid. Maybe that kid is very aggressive and you don't want to get involved in anything aggressive. And why do I keep saying that? Because the police are in some of the schools that we attend, public schools. The
Hmm.
police are there. So there is no middle person from school to prison.
Hmm.
You've got the police right there documenting any kind of problem that goes on in the classroom. So parents need to talk to their kids about what is appropriate behavior, and especially if their kid is growing and as big as an adult size, but
Hmm.
still teenager, young, young, so that they have to be protected. And that's the key, isn't it? Protect your child.
Absolutely. My takeaways, I think, are a great summation of today's conversation. Parents should always know the school policies and don't just count on the handbook. Go up and speak and ask, what is the policy if something happens? What should my student expect? What should I expect? What do you expect from us? Um, when at home with your family, talk about your experiences so your child understands that you know what it's like to witness or be the target of any type of discrimination. Let them know how it felt. um,
Mhm.
whether it was resolved to your satisfaction or not, let them know how that felt. um, we're here to take care of each other, so bystanders, remember that we're taking care of each other. And if your student is on the receiving end of discrimination and they don't want to do anything about it, you still talk to them, but try to impress upon them as gently as you can. If you're silent, you are setting yourself up for this to happen again. So there is a price you pay for the silence.
Yes, you do. And it will not protect you. Silence will not protect you. Mhm.
Thank you so much for joining me today. My family is going to be so happy that we have had this interview because I have been fangirling since we first got in contact with each other. And they are tired of hearing me listening to you on YouTube and talking about you. So I want to thank you very much for joining me today. It was a pleasure to speak with you. And thank you for sharing this valuable information with our audience.
There's nobody more important than our future, and our future are our children. So thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Tomorrow, every Wednesday, 10:30 a.m., we have Jen and Sharon, Coffee with Jen and Sharon, and they are going to be talking about something fun. They talk about it from the mom's perspective, moms parenting teens, and in general, being a mom and how funny it can be. So join them tomorrow. Bring your coffee or tea, whatever is your beverage of choice, 10:30 a.m. Eastern Time on the same social media platforms you're on today. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye bye.